Namaste. Welcome to Awaken Living with Nibodhi. Today's episode, we are exploring with compassion a pattern that many of us encounter on the spiritual path quite often without actually realizing it, actually completely unaware of it. It's called spiritual bypass or spiritual bypassing. And quite often it is the very thing that keeps us stuck. It keeps us from moving forward on our path for self-knowledge, self-realization, liberation, unconditional love, and embodying our wholeness, embodying our complete, sovereign, authentic, divine self. I just recently, in the last couple of years, learned about what spiritual bypassing was. Ultimately, it is the use of different spiritual concepts or religious ideas, spiritual practices, or even spiritual language, deflecting or avoiding facing our deep core traumas, our unresolved emotional wounds, our psychological pain, and even uncomfortable, unpleasant truths about ourselves and about the world. The term itself, spiritual bypass, was created by a Buddhist psychologist, John Welwood, and he observed how many people use spiritual practice. Instead of using it as a tool for integration, they use it as a defense against deep intimacy. I'm not talking about physical intimacy. I'm talking about spiritual, emotional intimacy in regards to one's own pain, one's own suffering, one's own trauma. And what that looks like, because I wasn't aware of what it looks like. So it's really understand to see how this shows up. It shows up in our language, especially on the spiritual path. And it doesn't matter what tradition it's in every tradition. Saying something like, everything happens for a reason. How many times have you heard this? Everything happens for a reason, to dismiss our grief, to dismiss our pain. Or even, especially in the Vedic tradition, in the Hindu tradition, in these kind of yogic traditions, the use of mantra. Now, mantra is so valuable. Used correctly, we can transform ego into pure awareness. We can transform our pain into pure bliss. But when used in a way that is in alignment with this bypass, what we do, what I see and what I have done myself is using positive affirmations or these mantras to mask anxiety, to mask even depression or deep sadness without actually going to the root and trying to heal the root or healing the root. And myself, I've used mantras to avoid feeling or to silence the mind, to remove or block emotions like anger. I've done this so many times. That was my primary go-to emotion, was anger. And when I would see anger arising, instead of embracing it and asking, what are you actually trying to tell me? What are you trying to offer me? What's the lesson here? I would just chant the mantra and try and shut the mind up. And even I would use meditation. And this is part of what spiritual bypass is about. This is what John Welwood really identified, that we use meditation to avoid the feelings of isolation or loneliness. And we go into a transcendental state. But it's not a true transcendental state. It's more like escapism. And actually, this is the biggest one. And I've seen this so much in the places I've lived in India, in the ashrams I've lived in India, where there's a belief or a false belief that our trauma is due to our own bad karma, that we did something so bad in our past life that our trauma is, we deserved it. Instead of facing our trauma with presence and empathy, we just pass it off as bad karma. And even I've seen people project that onto other people. I've seen people explain away suffering by saying someone's just working out their karma, or they chose this experience before they came to the world. That completely lacks compassion. That completely lacks heart, unconditional love. That's like saying when you're walking down the road and you see someone who's fallen in the ditch and they're asking for help, and you just look at them and say, oh, that's your karma. You deserve to be in that ditch. Well, no, they fell in the ditch. And it's our karma. We've seen them. We're in their presence to help them out of the ditch. But this is what spiritual bypass does. It explains away suffering or our pain by saying, this is their karma, they deserve this, or they chose this to get whatever lesson they needed in this life. And that may or may not be true, but it lacks compassion. It lacks empathy. It lacks love. And avoiding empathy by spiritualizing another's pain instead of truly listening, that's heartless. That there's no spiritual tradition that does not encourage unconditional love and empathy and compassion. So the spiritual bypass, it's not spiritual. It's actually these religious dogmas that have been projected on the world and onto spiritual paths by the human mind that's in trauma, that's in pain. So in essence, I see spiritual bypass, or just bypassing in general, is spirituality without embodiment. It's having insight, but there's zero integration involved in that. And it's really dangerous because so many times it actually feels like we're making progress, but what it's doing is blocking true healing. And I've heard it said that we can go to the cave. In the old days, they would go to the caves in the mountains to meditate. And especially if they were doing it to avoid their karma, to avoid marriage or family or whatever it was, the moment they come out of the cave, all the stuff that they were running away from is still there. And one of the reasons that this is dangerous is because this spiritual bypass can delay our deep, profound emotional healing. And if we want to know the self, we want to know God, Goddess, the universe as the self, we have to do the deep emotional healing. And oftentimes this bypassing creates a spiritual narcissism, or even feeling holier than thou, or some kind of superiority, thinking that we're better than somebody else. And it's complete illusion. It's reinforcing disassociation and our emotional numbness. And what I've seen this do in my life, and what I've seen it do in other people, is that it hinders our ability to have authentic relationships, first and foremost with ourselves, and then with others. And what I've seen that healthy spirituality truly looks like is when we are able to really face our discomfort with both courage and faith. Having the courage that if we go into the pain, we will have the support we need. We will have friends show up who can support us. We'll have the divine show up. When we truly face our pain, our discomfort, our trauma with faith and courage, I've never seen one incident where the universe didn't back us up. It didn't always happen instantly, but it happened. I truly have the full faith that the universe will never give us more than we can handle. Mother Teresa said something so beautiful that I hold so dear to me. She said, God will never give us more than we can handle. But sometimes I wish he didn't trust me so much. And yeah, sometimes it's like that the pain is so intense, but we will not get more than we can handle if we can have the faith and courage to move through it. And one of the things that I've had to learn in my life is that I need to accept and even honor my emotions as gurus, as teachers, as wise elders coming to teach me something about myself that I need to know, that I need to learn. And what that helps me do, what that's helped me do, is integrate shadow and light. Because the shadow is not wrong. We're not sinners because we have desires or vasanas, which are tendencies, which may be of divine nature or may not be so much divine nature. But we have to be able to have an integration of our light and our shadow. And in my life, I've had so many experiences where people completely love and accept and embrace my light and then condemn and ridicule and push me out because I have a shadow. Everyone has a shadow. And if we push someone out of our heart, out of our life because of the shadow, it makes our shadow grow deeper. It makes our own darkness grow deeper. We have to remain present. We have to remain in the embodiment process, which means it's in and through the body. There's a Sanskrit word called soma, which means the nectar of immortality, the bliss of immortality. The somatic experiencing, somatic healing is in and through the body. That soma, that nectar of immortality, that bliss that we're all seeking for. Even addicts, all addicts, they're not criminals, they're not wrong. They want to return to bliss too, and they're just seeking it outside of themselves. Everyone is. We're all addicted to something. But what soma does, what the somatic experiencing does, is allows us to become fully present and mindful and aware in this moment and feel it in and through the body. Consciousness is in and through the body. And if we can remain present and embodied in that, and we can use these ancient Vedic and modern psychological tools that have been given for thousands and thousands of years in conjunction with our spiritual practice, we can truly bring healing. We can truly bring awakening and transform this darkness to light, this illusion of birth and death, death to immortality, and pain into love. And the Vedic psychological model is really beautiful because it shows us and tells us and explains to us very clearly, systematically, that the mind, where all of this is happening, it's not a single unit. It's not separate from anything else. It's part of everything. It's this beautiful constellation. It's this galaxy that's embracing all these solar systems and stars. And what Vedic psychology does, I've talked about this in so many other talks that you can go back and listen to in depth. But Vedic psychology sees the mind, what Sanskrit names manas, this mind, the intellect, the buddhi, the ego, the ahamkar, and the self, the atman, as distinct individual things and an integrated aspect of the one divine consciousness, of the pure, undividable consciousness. And Vedic psychology also tells us that spiritual bypass happens when the ego co-opts these spiritual ideas in order to continue or preserve its illusion. Because it doesn't want to die. The ego wants to remain separate. It wants to remain in its illusion. So rather than surrender the constructs and concepts and preconditioned ideas and subconscious programs to the deeper self through things like atmavicharya, self-inquiry, or witness state, disidentification from the small self, it keeps perpetuating the illusion. What manas does, manas is the emotional mind. It's the sensory organs. It's the sense perceptions, while buddhi is that discerning intellect. Ego is the ahamkara is the ego, and atman is that self-pure awareness. So all bypass comes from the ahamkara, the ego. It hijacks the spiritual wisdom. It says things like, I'm evolved. I don't need therapy because I meditate, or I don't need therapy because I do mantra, or because I chant, or because I do selfless service. It veils ourself. It says, I'm awakened now. I don't need to feel these emotions anymore. Or even it says, I see the illusion, but I'm above the pain. I don't need to feel this. In truth, those are all the voices of the subconscious. It's the voices of the unprocessed samskaras, these deep subconscious impressions left through our past experiences, through our traumas. And bypass really is blocking us. It's preventing us from burning through these karmic tendencies. It allows us, or what it's doing is avoiding the inner work. It's promoting these karmic tendencies that avoid the inner work. That's what we call Maya, illusion. It's a form of avidya, ignorance. It thinks that we're awake and we're actually asleep. We're trapped in these conditions, these subconscious programs. I'm very excited to share with you Real Mushrooms, the sponsor of the Awakened Living podcast. I use their mushrooms every single day because they've genuinely changed my life. I trust them because they have 50 years of expertise and use 100% organic mushrooms, 0 grains, 0 fillers, which are found in most common mushroom products on the market. They use just real, organic, clinically tested mushrooms. Every morning, I use lion's mane to sharpen my thinking. I use cordyceps to give me the clean energy I need for the day. I use chaga to strengthen my immune system. And when stress hits, and it does, I use reishi to bring me back to center. With their products, you actually feel the difference. For the month of January, Real Mushrooms gives Awaken Living with Nibodhi podcast listeners 25% off their entire first order. Use the code AWAKEN25 at checkout to get 25% off your entire first purchase. You can find their link in the show notes or visit nibodhi.com/mushrooms to get yours today. In the Vedic tradition, in Ayurveda, in yoga, in Vedic psychology, there's these gunas, the manasa gunas, the mental qualities, sattva, rajas, and tamas. And it's this spiritual balance between sattva and tamas. Rajas is just energy. It's the energy that allows either sattva or tamas to continue. So real spiritual growth only happens through sattva. That's the clarity, the truth, the harmony of consciousness itself. Spiritual bypass manifests most often through the tamasic qualities or the tamasic illusion, denial, passivity, and, fa peace. So what the bypass is doing is it keeps suppressing, repressing, depressing, burying what's actually there deep into the tissues. The issues become stored in the tissues. The Vedas, the Vedic teachings, these wisdom traditions, not just in India, all wisdom traditions all over the world, share with us, teach us, encourage us to have the understanding that our liberation, our freedom from the ego, our freedom from the illusion, it doesn't come through avoidance. It comes in and through the body, through satya, through the truthfulness, and through viveka, discernment, and from tapas. Not the tapas bar where you go and get some, little snacks before you drink the spirits and get intoxicated, and again, further bypass. It's the tapas, it's the inner fire of transformation. A lot of times in many traditions, tapas is equated with suffering, and it has nothing to do with that. It's actually the dissolution of suffering. It's the inner fire. It's the fire that cooks all the pain into pleasure, into love, into light. It burns all that's unnecessary and hindering our path out of the way. It's clearing the dead brush out of the forest path so we can reach the forest of immortality. All of this, I'm saying, all of these paths that the Vedas have taught us, that the wisdom traditions have taught us, that the wisdom elders have given to us, it's to wake up. And they all say one thing: go within. And they say, go within, and we will never, ever, ever go without. Doesn't mean we don't enjoy the material world. Doesn't mean we don't enjoy the body and the sense organs that God has given us. Actually, when we are established in the self, the enjoyment becomes bliss because there's no bondage to it. There's no attachment to it. And we see it as a game, as a play. What Sanskrit names Leela, the divine play. It's all the play of consciousness. But in order to do that, we have to feel what we've been avoiding feeling. We have to grieve what we've been avoiding grieving. We have to reclaim the parts of ourself that we've exiled in the name of spirituality, in the name of spiritual purity, in the name of being holy. Everyone is already whole. Everyone is already perfect. There's a Sanskrit mantra, Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. It means from the whole, from that perfect divine consciousness, creation happens, and creation is perfect and whole. And if you try to take away from the whole, all that remains left is the whole. Even the trying is whole and perfect and holy. Everything is whole and perfect and holy and divine. Even the illusion of our suffering and pain. And the journey to regain our consciousness is pure and holy and divine. But it's a reclamation of that holiness, of that divinity, of that spiritual purity that we've exiled, saying we're sinners. We have to attain enlightenment. It's something outside of ourselves, somewhere in the future that we have to get. It's here and now if we allow it to be. We just have to remove everything that's not that. The sun is always shining. If we close the window blinds and have dark out curtains and saying that the sun isn't shining. It's not shining. That's ridiculous. We just close the curtains. We close the curtains to God's light, to God's grace, which is our own light and grace. We have to stop closing the curtains, open the curtains, and reestablish self. This is what Ayurveda offers us. Ayurveda gives us this beautiful view that we can see what we've done to ourselves, this bypass through the lens of the doshas and the gunas, the bioenergetic and psychospiritual forces in nature. For example, remember there's 3 doshas, vata, pitta, and kapha, and that's all the elements and all the qualities in creation. Vata is the space which contains everything, and the air element which moves life force. Pitta is the fire, and kapha is the water and earth. That's all that there is. So from a vata perspective, someone who's vata predominant, they bypass looking at themselves. They bypass via disassociation through being spaced out, floating in the cosmos, the ethers, and constantly in search of chasing, looking for the transcendence. But they're ignoring the body. They never land in their body. They escape through these spiritual ideals and disembodiment and erratic practices. Erratic practices. And what that does is overstimulates the mind through too many techniques, too many paths. They never truly dig one deep well. They don't dig a deep hole where they reach water and quench the thirst. They dig 10 holes 1 foot deep instead of 1 hole 10 foot deep. So they never get the thirst quenched. Vata's air and space. They never get to the water. For a pitta, pittas are knowledge. They're the wisdom tradition. They're the light of consciousness. So they weaponize their knowledge. They turn spirituality into some external achievement where they've strived for perfection. They got their certificate. They got the PhD or whatever. And then they are in righteousness and judge others for being not woke, less conscious, whatever. And they think they're using their knowledge to dominate and control. Their mantra might be, I know more. I've read the scriptures. I've studied these texts. I've got these many degrees. But what that perfection does is creates more separateness. It creates more division. And so many times it's masked as devotion. They think they've done so much karma yoga. They did so many hours of selfless service. And they're so special and so loved by God because they did so much more than everyone else. And they slept only 2 hours that night and worked 22 hours. I myself have done this. I'm a pitta. I've done 20, 22 hours, 24 hours, even 28 hours without sleep doing selfless service. And yes, those things were wonderful and beautiful and useful, but there was ego in it. And what happened was I became exhausted and I became angry afterwards and I became resentful afterwards that other people weren't doing that. It's total bypass. But I had the knowledge that when you do guru seva, when you do selfless service, you get punyam, you get merit. So I did so much. But I was doing it. This ego was doing it. It wasn't out of true love and true devotion and true selflessness. It was so that I would get punyam, I would get merit, I would get more grace than, say, someone else. I actually wasn't comparing, but I was just trying to get more grace. And what that did was made me miserable. And it took me years to figure that out. I did this year after year after year, tour after tour after tour. And I finally got to burnout. I wasn't happy. The fire burned out. There wasn't the light of love in my heart anymore. And it was masked as devotion. I know this. This is my experience. This is what I did for so many years. And what happened was I ended up surrendering all of that. Surrendering everything I thought I knew. I had to surrender because what I knew wasn't working. What I thought I knew wasn't working. It led me to more happiness and more misery. And then I wasn't kind and happy with other people, and I was creating suffering in other people. So I know this. This has been my experience. I had to learn very harsh lessons through this. For a kapha, what ends up happening is because kapha is often associated with tamas, dullness. So they might fall into maybe complacency, confusing their own stillness or confusing their stagnation with stillness, calling inertia or dullness or lack of inspiration acceptance. Kapha often avoids action and uses spiritual detachment to justify saying it's all God's will, and they confuse peace with suppression. And that's when these emotions get suppressed, it becomes depression. It becomes serious depression and even suicidal tendencies, although they don't have the energy to carry through with it, thank Goddess. So these gunas, these mental qualities, sattva, rajas, tamas, when we're stuck in this tamasic state, this dullness, it creates almost like a spiritual numbness where we end up in denial of our issues. We end up repressing the issues. And if we're not able to face our issues, we end up, I've seen this. I've seen what I would call blind obedience to dogma. Instead of going for self-realization or God realization, it becomes ashram realization or religious realization, believing the dogma versus believing in oneself. And ultimately what that can lead to is some kind of apathy and really a numbing out. Going, like doing spiritual rituals, doing pujas, they're just going through the action, but there's no heart in it. There's no actual consciousness in it. Whereas the rajasic quality fuels too much effort. And that's been my life. That's been the experience in my life, is just doing too much effort, doing, and believing that I was the doer and I was the power behind it. And for some, that leads to spiritual materialism or being attached to, like, even addiction to peak experiences. I had a friend who was a mother of 2 children and wasn't really ready to be a mother and wasn't in good relationship with her husband. And what she did was spent 8 to 12 hours a day in yoga classes and in chanting classes and spiritual classes to avoid dealing with the material world, her family, the real life issues, and to have these peak experiences. She just said she was high all the time. She was in bliss, and that everyone else was wrong. And that, that's not the true way. That's avoidance. That's real avoidance. The only way to really get to truth is through sattva, and that comes from clarity and compassion and the courage to have self-awareness. And only through that courageous self-awareness can we actually really start to have true healing. Ayurveda, yoga, the spiritual path, it doesn't separate body and consciousness. Healing is only possible through the embodiment process. And real transformation, if we really want to transform our lives, our consciousness, it requires that we digest not just our food, but our life experiences, our feelings, our emotions, all of it. And Ayurveda is so beautiful because it provides grounding tools, what's called the dinacharya, the daily rhythm, these daily practices that are in compatibility with our individual dosha. So we have to digest our food. We have to digest our life experiences. We have to digest our emotions. It's what's called Manavaha Shrota Shodhana, the digestion of our mental, emotional toxins. We have to be able to take everything, physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual experiences, and digest it, transform it in the light of consciousness. And that's what yoga calls yogash chitta vritti nirodha. It means that yoga, union with the self, union with the world, the universe, is coming only through the stillness of the fluctuations of the mind, not by bypass, not by creating false stillness through false spiritual practices, not by anything other than true awareness. Spiritual bypass, what it's actually doing is obstructing this chitta vritti nirodha, because unresolved mental, emotional patterns, they remain active even when they're masked by spiritual practices. I've seen this so many times where people are doing seva and then they turn around and yell at someone. They turn around and move someone's meditation cushion so they can be 6 inches closer to the guru. Regardless of how much spiritual practice we do, if we're not engaged in self-inquiry, these patterns, they become suppressed, repressed into ourselves. And we will mistake samadhi, this state of higher consciousness, or even disassociated states, for enlightenment. We think we're enlightened when we're actually not connected to the body. We're not connected to our emotions. And when I've heard this said, when, in the non-dual tradition, Advaita Vedanta, it says that everything is one. There's no separate self. But this is used also in bypass. People say, there's no self. It's all illusion. This avoids our emotional pain. It's all one. It's all an illusion. It doesn't matter. It matters. It matters as long as there's mind and there's matter. When there's no mind, when we're truly in that highest state, then it doesn't matter because there's only oneness. And in that oneness, there's unconditional love. And in that unconditional love, everything matters because everything is your own self. So another suffering is your own suffering because it's your suffering. If we are able to do swadhyaya, what yoga calls swadhyaya, it's self-study. It doesn't mean we study by ourselves in the corner of a room. It means we're studying the self. We're studying the nature of ourself. This creates an inner discipline. It creates an inner light, an inner fire that sparks our inspiration and creativity. And what happens is we actually enter into bhakti, into loving devotional service. We don't repress our emotion anymore. We express it through loving devotion first and foremost to our own self. We don't repress the emotions. We don't suppress the emotions. We feel everything, the longing, the separation, the union, the beauty. And in reality, it is true. There's only one of us. There's Brahman, the supreme consciousness. And here, in this body, on this earth, in this incarnation, in this breath, there is heartbreak. There is pain. And we did choose it. And that's not bypass. That choice is that we came here so we can feel it all. So we can feel the pain, the separation, the longing, the grief, the anger, the sadness, the lust, the greed, all of it, and the joy and the happiness and the celebration and the bliss. We came for all of it. Yoga, Ayurveda, Vedanta, these spiritual practices, they're a path towards integration, not suppression. The true spiritual practice, we call this sadhana. It transforms the impurities. And the impurities, we call them kleshas. There's pancha kleshas, 5 impurities, or ways that we separate ourselves from union. Our likes, our dislikes, our confusion of who we truly are, our fear of death, our attachment, and our aversion. And when we have these, it separates us from the self. So we are not able to rest in our own true nature. So when we do the spiritual practice, when we do sadhana, not out of trying to achieve something outside of ourselves, but just removing what's not true, these impurities disappear in the light of awareness. If we're sitting in a dark room, a really dark room, what's the solution? Don't question why the room is dark. Don't question how did darkness come. Should there be darkness? Am I part of the darkness? Turn on the light switch. So simple. Turn on the light switch. Light a small candle. The whole room becomes illuminated. We need to light the lamp within our heart, within our consciousness. So yoga gives us these practices. The swadhyaya, this honest, true, integrative self-study. Atma-vicharya, questioning ourselves. Am I my thoughts? Am I my mind? Am I the emotions? Am I the transient nature? I mean, we're not the body. Every cell in the body is brand new every 2 years. The body is constantly rejuvenating. If we were the body, we would be dead, and this personality that's here, that's a continuous stream, would not be here anymore. The tapas, the willingness to surrender ourselves to burning away everything that's not true. Who doesn't want the truth? Only an ignorant person doesn't want the truth. There's a saying, ignorance is bliss. Ignorance is not bliss. Ignorance is ignorance. Bliss is bliss. And the Ishwara Pranidhan, this is so beautiful. It's the surrendering of the small self, the ego self, the limited self to the higher self. The surrendering of limitation to unlimited, unconditional greatness, unlimited, unconditional love. And through the sincere practices, there's 3 yogas, which is all categorized as Raja Yoga, the great path. Bhakti Yoga, Karma Yoga, and Jnana Yoga. That's the path of devotion, of selfless service, and of wisdom. And it's like a plane. You need the body of the plane. That's the jnana, the knowledge. And then one wing is the bhakti, the devotion. One wing is the service, the karma yoga. And that flies the plane. And if we can have the courage to really, truly just feel and love fully and deeply, especially the parts of us that we want to avoid, we transcend the ego. We don't transcend the ego by ignoring it, by bypassing it, by suppressing it. We transcend it by saying the ego has a function. If we don't have an ego, we don't remember where we live. We don't remember to pay the bills. We don't remember to feed ourselves. If we actually sincerely dissolve the ego, the universe will have people appear who will take care of our body. We've seen this throughout the stories of so many saints in history and every tradition. But we're not there yet. If you're listening to this talk, there's a high probability that you're like me, we still have an ego. Otherwise, why are you going on the internet and listening to podcasts? You should be giving a podcast, or you should be on my podcast. If you have no ego, I want to interview you, please, and how you got there and what you can teach us and how to get there, okay? But my understanding is that we transcend the ego by loving it into wholeness, not by bypassing it, okay? One of my favorite teachers of all time is Dr. Gabor Mate and his work on compassionate inquiry. And it really does speak of this bypass as an adaptation to or from our trauma. When we were young, when we were vulnerable, before we had a prefrontal cortex, before we even had a concept that we were separate from anyone else, we may have learned that it wasn't safe to feel. And what we adapted was coping mechanisms. And that's a disconnection from self. And later we may have found that spiritual practice give us a sense of control or safety. The spiritual practice is to help us to heal these core fundamental wounds, not to give us a sense of control or safety. Now, we do need safety. We need to feel safe in order to heal, but it's a false sense of safety. Bypassing isn't healing. It's a way of, well, what it is it's a way of not being present to what is. That's what bypass does. It allows us to not be present with what is, because maybe what is too painful. And that's why addiction happens. We seek something outside of ourselves because going with inside of ourselves is just too painful. And we get a little bit of dopamine from that substance or that experience outside of ourselves. And we feel closer to regulation from that substance or action. So we need to make sure that we don't make spirituality another form of adaptation, a mask that's hiding our inner child's unmet needs. We need to hold and caress and honor and listen to that inner child. And what these spiritual practices may do, if not done with embodiment, is soothe or sedate without any transformation. It doesn't transform this underlying trauma into wisdom, because we can transform our trauma into wisdom. But we have to be able to love it and hold it with empathy and compassion. What I see bypass as is a disembodiment of self. And it makes sense because it's painful. I get it. I mean, I've had to do so much, even in the last 2 years. I thought I've been doing spiritual practices for 34 years. And I thought I was so advanced. And in the last 2 years, I've experienced more pain than I've ever experienced in my life. Not physical pain, emotional pain, mental pain, and the spiritual pain of realizing that I was bypassing. And what I was using a lot of my spiritual practices for was for soothing or sedating. I wasn't really addressing the underlying trauma. I wasn't embodied. I wasn't able to deal with the core pain or the shame, because I've never had shame, but there's been grief. I've dealt with so much abandonment issues. I was left by my parents at the age of 1 month old, and they lied to me about it. They're never going to listen to this, but if they are listening, it's great. They don't even want to talk about it. So I'm sure they're never going to listen to it. I've written 7 books. They've never read one of them. I was abandoned at 1 month old, and I'm not seeking sympathy because I've dealt with this, but I was left alone at the age of 1 month old in a room filled with other children who were left alone at 1 month old, whose parents decided that it was better for them to go back to work. And I wasn't breastfed. And I know a lot of people aren't breastfed, but to me, that's actually a major thing because it created psychological issues throughout my life. And really, in the last 2 years, I've dealt with, on a core fundamental level, this abandonment and being not breastfed and not held 18 hours a day in a room full of other children not being held because the nursery was understaffed. And because for some reason I didn't cry, I was not ever held. And so I sought that in my relationships, in my interactions. But what that did was, in all the spiritual practices I've done since 16, all the psychedelics I've taken, all the pilgrimages I've done, was seeking something outside of myself instead of looking within. What I figured out was that I have to deal with the core pain, the core abandonment issues. Whatever your issue is, we have to deal with it. And healing requires being present with what is, not what we wish it were. Yeah, I wish I was held. I wish I was breastfed. I wish my parents didn't leave me alone at the age of 7 to take care of me and my 4.5-year-old brother. But that's what happened. So I had to become present with it, and I had to deal with that, and I had to reconnect with my body, and I had to sit still and stop seeking something outside of myself to numb the pain. And I did that through breath. And I breathe deeply. And when the pain comes up, I breathe and I look at the truth. And it's so scary and it's so vulnerable. And there was moments when it felt unbearable. And I just kept breathing because I knew from the wisdom of the yogis, of all the traditions, and of the spiritual practices that I did, that if I would breathe and be present with it, it would transform. And it did help me reconnect with my body. It helped me explore on a deep cellular level what happened to me rather than seeing it as what's wrong with me. These were the scenarios that happened, and my higher self helped me adapt so I could survive, so I could be here today sharing my life with you, sharing my consciousness with you. And during the pandemic, I had the blessing of doing this training in compassionate inquiry, which made me look deeper at myself than any spiritual practice I've ever done. If you have the opportunity to study compassionate inquiry, listen to Dr. Gabor Mate's audiobooks, read his books, listen to his talks. It's profound wisdom. In compassionate inquiry, bypass dissolves because it provides us the framework to meet our inner experience with humility, with honesty, with empathy, and curiosity. And that's what our ego fears. Our ego fears us being open to curiosity, to empathy, to compassion, to honesty, to what if, and realizing that all of our negative tendencies, our vasanas and samskars, they were adaptations that actually helped us survive. So instead of condemning them, we should be thanking them. We should be blessing them. We should be so grateful to them. But we don't need them anymore. So we set them free. We set them on their way. And that invites us back to ourselves, to meet our bodiness with gentleness, with tenderness, with empathy, with compassion, and to really be curious when defense mechanisms come up, when we become guarded, when we become tense. What if we're curious about that instead of being ashamed of these things? On the spiritual path, there's so much guilt and shame. That's ridiculous. Those things, those defenses were protecting us. Why? What did we need protection from? We become curious. We become investigative. That's all. And on the spiritual path also, when we have anger or grief or fear, they're condemned. They're saying the spiritual traditions, these religious traditions, saying they're not holy, they're not divine. They're obstacles. No, they're doorways. Those things, the anger, the fear, the grief, the sadness, they're messengers, they're teachers. They're like the lights on the car dashboard saying check engine, check oil, check brakes. They're messengers. Hey, something needs to be addressed. So the question becomes, at that point, not how can I fix this? What substance can I take? What action can I do to make this go away? The question truly becomes, if we're mindful, what happened to me? What happened to me that my higher self created these defense mechanisms and these adaptations to help me survive? What happened to me that made this pain so unbearable that I couldn't feel it, that I couldn't deal with it? And I'm still trying to not deal with it through A, B, C, and D, substance or action, or even spiritual practice. Like my friend who would go to 8 yoga classes a day to avoid coming home to her husband and children. How do we move from the bypass, the spiritual bypass, this illusion, to some kind of conscious breakthrough, some kind of conscious awareness? In my life, what I've done is stopped. There was an experience I had last year that was probably the single most emotional, painful experience in my life, and I'm not ready to share that publicly. But what I did was I went to the earth and I sat with it while it was happening, and I just breathed all night long, through the night, from sunset to sunrise. I sat with the pain and I just watched it. I didn't judge it. I didn't condemn it. I didn't even try and change it. I just breathed into it and I said, okay, I'm here for you. And I watched it. And I would say it was literally the longest and darkest night of my life. And what happened was the sun rose. And the people that were involved, I spoke with them in the morning. And what happened was my heart opened and my body relaxed in a way that I don't think it's ever done in my life. At some point in my life, some point in this podcast, I may or may not share it. It may or may not be safe for those other people involved. I want to honor their sovereignty as well. But what happened was I stopped. Einstein once said, we slow down. We must slow down first. And he said, what Einstein said was, we cannot solve the problems of the world with the same thought process that created them. We have to stop. We have to slow down. We have to breathe, and we have to listen inward, and we have to be okay feeling. And if we're capable of feeling the most divine bliss, we're also capable of feeling the deepest, darkest pain, and just be with it. The suffering, pain is not suffering. Emotional and mental pain isn't suffering. It's when we identify who we are as that pain, as that trauma, as that suffering. So if we can witness the pain and suffering just as much as we can witness the happiness and celebration and bliss, and we identify with the witness, the consciousness, it transforms. And what we need to do is really this inward looking. We let go of trying to appear spiritual. We let go of trying to appear spiritually advanced so that we have attained anything. And we commit ourselves to being honest and real and raw. And yeah, that is really freaking scary. And admitting when we screw up royally, when we hurt other people. Hurt people. Who isn't hurt? Unless we become conscious, we continue to hurt ourselves and other people. Hurt people. Healed people, heal people. So here's a few practices, kind of like guiding signposts that can help us. The first one really is to notice our language. Are we using religious or spiritual phrases to bypass or to avoid the discomfort? Remember, it's all your karma. It's my own karma. I must have done bad things in my past life. I deserve this. No. We need to pay attention to the language and stop using these spiritual phrases, these concepts, these illusions to avoid discomfort. It's okay to be uncomfortable. We have to learn to be okay being comfortable, being uncomfortable. It's okay to not be okay, but we need to check in with our body. We're only okay not being okay if we're present with our body. We breathe into it. We become grounded. Or are we checking out? Are we disconnecting? Are we floating away out of our body, out of feeling? We have to check in with the body, but that's through breath. We have to create a space that's safe to go into our darkness, to go into our shadow. We have to be able to cry, to rage, have a sacred tantrum. An ordinary tantrum, it's not going to transform anything. A sacred tantrum with consciousness, with awareness. Journaling, writing down every feeling, every emotion. unapologetically. And one of the greatest things for transforming our shadow, transforming the pain, is dancing, to feel without fixing anything. Gabrielle Roth and her son, Jonathan Horan, created a practice called the 5 rhythms, the 5 rhythms dance. And we dance the 5 elements, the 5 rhythms, and all emotions are contained within that 5 elements and that 5 rhythms. And we dance it, we move it, we transform it. We experience life through song and dance. Every tradition on planet Earth, song and dance. That's how we experience. The biggest selling hits of all time are love songs of separation and grief and longing, because they're so beautiful. It touches on the human experience. We have to be able to sing and dance our experience. That's the artistic form of God consciousness in and through the body. And it is valuable to work with a guide or a therapist or a counselor who is trained both in trauma therapy and spirituality. If you go to the Compassionate Inquiry website, there's a lot of practitioners there who can truly help transform the physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual, because so many people have gone through this course and who are trained, myself included. We've done this because we found this method very valuable for healing our own trauma. I don't think it's really possible to really empathize and have compassion for someone who's in pain and trauma unless we've experienced it ourselves. So a lot of the people I know who are on the Compassion Inquiry website and who are providing true love and light to the world have gone through the most immense amount of pain and sorrow and trauma in their life and come out in the light and know how to guide you through it. The other really important thing, it's called satsang or sangha, in the company of truth. We need to surround ourselves with people who we value as authentic, as wise elders, not just appearing as such, who are truly authentic and who are wise elders. As we begin to come to an end, really, like, one of the most important things is remember that being spiritual doesn't always mean being calm. It means being true, and it means being honest, and it means being authentic about where we are at and where we're not, and being completely okay with being seen as a fraud. But we're not a fraud. If we're truly authentic in ourselves and honest and true of where we're at, that's actually the most authentic there is. That's the most true there is. And what that ultimately means, as scary as it is feeling everything and still choosing love, feeling the pain, feeling the abandonment and all of it, and still choosing love. Spirituality is not about escaping the human experience. It's about embracing it so fully that the human experience becomes divine. Our spiritual growth, true spiritual growth, is not escaping our humanity. It's the full embrace of it. It's the grief and it's the grace. It's the sacred and the profane. And the sacred is not just found in transcendental states. It's found in the shaking, in the screaming, in the punching of the pillow, in the crying, in the breaking open. For something to sprout, to grow a plant, the seed has to be humble and go deep into the darkness of the soil. And it has to wait there. And then it breaks open, and then this beautiful sprout comes in. It grows into a mighty tree that provides us shade and shelter and food. We have to be willing to go deep into the darkness of the soil, go beneath the soil, see what's there, and break open and rise from that darkness with more humility and more love and more joy and more compassion and more authentic heart. We don't need to be perfect. We need to be present with what is. We need to be present with where we truly are and where we're not, and be honest about that. And if we're willing to meet ourselves here fully, we find that healing is not out there. It's not in going to all the therapy sessions you can or doing this method or that method. It's inside. It's an inside job. It's already inside you. Remember, Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. From the perfect is manifested. If you try to take away from the perfect, only the perfect remains. This is perfect. That is perfect. From the perfect comes the perfect remaining as the perfection. When we accept that, when we embrace that, when we become that, we're at peace. Peace internally, externally, and we create peace in our universe. I've personally found it very valuable to have a journal and to do a journaling ritual. What this does ultimately is helps me really identify with my God self, my light self, versus identifying with the darkness, with the shadow. What I do is I bring myself into a calm state. That's through taking 3 deep breaths, in through the nose and out through the mouth, and allowing my body to relax. And I light a candle, usually a ghee lamp or an oil lamp, and just breathing, doing ujjayi breath. That's Darth Vader breathing. It's through the throat. And it calms the nervous system. It calms the vagus nerve. And I put myself in a state to be honest, radically honest with myself through the pain, through the grief, through the sorrow. But I do it with a gentleness and a compassion towards my higher self, realizing that I'm not my pain and my trauma. And I have questions that I ask myself. And so I do it both from a compassionate inquiry space and from an Ayurvedic Vedic model. So the questions I've written down and that I ask myself and I write down, number 1 is, where in my life, or are there places in my life where I'm hiding behind spiritual ideas or practices, such as it's all divine or everything is an illusion? I ask myself that, and I'm honest with that. And for me, because I've been doing this for so long, the answer is usually I'm not hiding anymore. It's all divine, and I'm okay feeling the pain. And then the next question that I've asked myself in this journaling is, what emotions, what parts of this myself, because it's all just parts of the self. It's parts. We do parts work. What emotions or parts of myself do I find it hardest to sit with, and how do I use spirituality to avoid them? I don't anymore. I'm not using spirituality to avoid them. I sit with them. And it's difficult some days, but I sit with them. Which parts of myself do I find it hard to sit with? And I no longer avoid them. I did for a long time, but I don't. But it's just a question. What emotions or parts of myself do I find it hardest to sit with? Don't judge them. They're not good, bad, right, or wrong. Just asking a question out of curiosity. And then the next question there becomes, do I impose upon myself pressure to appear spiritual? Do I impose upon myself the pressure to appear peaceful or full of knowledge or wisdom or whatever it is, even when I'm hurting inside? Am I using what I've learned from the scriptures or from spirituality to appear as spiritual, wise, peaceful, whatever it is? And then, so that's just a question. It's not good, bad, right, or wrong again. We're just asking a question out of curiosity. If there's an answer, if it's whatever the answer is, then we ask why. What is that thing doing? What is the appearance of spirituality or peacefulness or wisdom? What is it doing for us? Why are we doing that? Are we afraid to show up authentically, or afraid of being judged or condemned? Or as a child, were we told that we're good, bad, right, or wrong, that we're loved only if we appear publicly like this, only if we talk like this, if we say like this? We have to ask why. We're not trying to fix anything. We're just looking at the why, the who, the what, the why, the where, the how. Because it's through the understanding that we can have empathy and compassion. From the Vedic lens, we're asking similar questions, but it's really just an examination as well. From the dosha lens, from the what doshic tendencies are present, regardless of what your natural constitution is. Is Vata, Pitta, or Kapha tendencies showing up, especially when we're trying to avoid that discomfort, the emotional discomfort? Vata, is it trying to escape into some spiritual ideal or just transcend out of the material world and not feel anything? Pitta, is it trying to control the situation, to overanalyze it, analyze it, anal constriction? Or Kapha, is it trying to numb it out or shut it down, just completely depress it all together, not to feel it? and then looking at from that manasa guna, the mental quality, especially when we're trying to bypass. What gunas is dominant when we're trying to do spiritual bypass? If it's a tamasic state, we're denying, we're in denial. We're in full denial of where we're actually at and where we're not. In Rajas, it's hyperactivity. This was me a lot because Rajas is associated with Pitta. I would do action, action, action. I would do so much karma yoga, so many hours of selfless service in order to stop feeling, in order to stop paying attention to myself. And albeit those things were valuable and they were beneficial to someone, but they weren't necessarily or always beneficial to myself. And if I'm not truly honoring myself, I'm not being authentic with other people, even though I was showing up that way. It was a facade. And if you're listening to this and you were one of the people who I saw when I was into my 20th hour and I wasn't fully present with you and you felt like I wasn't present with you, I'm truly sorry. I did what I knew in the time, but we are always doing our best. No one is doing their best and bypassing. So this talk is just about providing clarity and understanding of where we're at. So maybe when we're ready, we wake up, the seed is planted and it sprouts in its own time. Now, here's another quality that we can actually use as bypass. Sattva can be used as bypass. We think we're in clarity, but we need to ask ourselves, am I truly in a sattvic state or am I just performative? Am I acting what I've read as sattvic, when I'm acting what I've seen as sattvic, or am I truly in that pure state? And if we're acting, we're actually in a rajasic state. So, we have to look at these mental patterns, these mental wounds, and looking at if we're avoiding something by staying in the so-called light. We need to be open to accepting that we might be escaping. We need to become open to life. We need to be open to inviting true emotional embodiment and honesty in our life. And that requires really looking at when we learned in our life that it wasn't safe to do that, when it wasn't safe to express our emotions, whether it was bliss emotions or difficult emotions. Being a man, physically, I'm born a man. In the 80s, this band from England called The Cure, they wrote a song, Boys Don't Cry, cover it all up with lies. We were taught boys don't cry, boys don't feel. We have to show up as a man. It's not manly to cry. It's not manly to not cry. Okay? What were we told about anger, about sadness, about fear as a child? They're weaknesses, right? No. When used properly, they're our strength. But we have to understand that they're guiding us to heal the core wounds or any unmet need we might have had. And if we're using spirituality to avoid dealing with our core wounds and unmet needs, we're not showing up. We need to stop spiritualizing our trauma. Ask your body what it truly feels. What part of us is longing to be held, to be seen, to no longer be judged or condemned or made into a sinner for how it feels? From that, here's the really, really, I think one of the most important questions. I know one of the most important questions. What does it look like to truly, authentically live in a spiritual life that embraces every part of ourself, the sacred, the profane, and the scared, and the clear, and the confused, and the divine, and the deeply human? Write a love letter to that part of yourself that you've been bypassing. Write a love letter to the hurt child, to the abandoned child, to the wounded child. Write a love letter to the part of yourself that you've been bypassing with total devotion, with empathy, compassion. Be okay on the days that you're not okay. You don't need to fix anything. Breathe and be with what is. Breathe and be with yourself. Breathe and send yourself all the love that you would ever want. That's showing up for yourself. That's the spiritual work. The spiritual path is love. God is love, love embodied. You are the embodiment of God. You are the embodiment of love. And everything else is just covering that up. So here is my offering to uncovering anything that's blocking the light. from the depth of my heart, I sincerely thank you for being with me in this conversation, on this journey, on this path. If you've been listening to this podcast, thank you so much. It means the world to me. Your presence, your attention is what allows me to keep going. I can share my journey with you. And I recommend and encourage you to share your comments because your journey is important to me. We learn by sharing our experience, what works for us. What works for me may not work for you. Share what works for you. We're all a small little piece of this universal puzzle. We're one note in this divine universal song, universe, one verse, one song. We're all one note that makes a symphony play, this beautiful harmonic frequency. So when we harmonize with ourselves, when we harmonize with nature, with each other, the song is sung and the song is played and we dance in celebration. If today's discussion resonated with you, share it with someone who may be navigating and exploring their own healing. And again, as always, feel free to leave a review, send a message, join the newsletter at Nibodhi.com. And until next week, stay grounded, stay honest, stay with your breath, stay present, and stay in love. Fill our hearts with love and express it in everything we do, every thought, every word, every action. And light the lamp of love within yourself. Together we transform the world from darkness to light, from the illusion of death to the reality of our immortality, and from the untruth of separateness to the truth of unity. Namaste.